Hi, my name is Crystal. This Saturday night, the UFC returns, and BetStamps has joined up with the Todd Atkins Show to provide a one-stop shop website for all of your gambling needs. When you visit Todd's page, signupexpert.com/TAS, you'll be connected to all of the sports books in your region, along with a review of each platform and its unique benefits. All of these sports books have valuable offers for new users. So when you register through MyLink, you'll automatically receive the top offers at each one. So if you want to take advantage of these benefits and support the Todd Atkins Show, please consider signing up for your next sports book at expertsignup.com/TAS. Again, my name is Crystal, and you can find me on TikTok at unapologeticallyme0424. Happy gambling!
I'm Derek Alanis, and you guys are watching MMA Conspiracy Hour with my boy Todd Atkins and Miguel Iterate. Miguel worked for Bodog, Hook and Shoot, Euphoria, and ADCC. You can find Miguel at MMA Collector 74 on YouTube. And if you want to hear what I got to say about the fight game, it's at Derek Alanis on TikTok or at Derek Alanis on Instagram. If you want to hear about crime, the new wave of organized crime, it's at Derek Meyer Galanis on TikTok and at Derek Galanis at Instagram.
All right, so it's Todd Atkins and Miguel Iterate, and we're here with the MMA Conspiracy Hour. You know, the UFC antitrust lawsuit settlement just dropped. You know, we hadn't planned on doing an episode tonight, but, you know, everybody's got to address this. And we obviously talked a lot about it. We had Rob Macy, who's one of the lawyers on that case. He appear on our show, and I'm sure at some point when this all clears out, he'll come back and we can do some more. But that'll probably be a couple months down the road. But you know, I really wanted to get Miguel's kind of opening thoughts on this. And before we do, as always, I want to thank our sponsors, Live to Fight and BetStamp. And Miguel, I just kind of want to get your opening thoughts on, you know, kind of the number, which I think was 335 million. And we haven't heard any other details, so there may not be any, who knows, but just the number itself.
You know, it's starting to look more and more like, you know, Dana may have, I don't know, may have some type of extraterrestrial powers or dark powers, or may have sold his soul to whatever being or whatever, because it gets harder and harder to vote against or to bet against this guy. To me, the Black Hats won today. And when me and you have done speculative, and, you know, we were talking about this, and when they went into the arbitration thing, you know, you were like, you know, they've been kind of gearing up for court. It'll go to court. And I kind of cautioned against it a little bit, thinking, no, this is dangerous. And even then, while we spent podcasts speculating about things, even the numbers that we made up, you know, I started at $1 billion on the low end for a settlement, and that might be hard for the fighters to turn down. You know, if you escalate that for $5 billion, which would be a considerable number for any company, but to get out of this lawsuit, you know, $5 billion would have meant a lot of money for the fighters, to the point where, you know, they could retire and could live comfortably the rest of their lives. 335 million sounds like a really low number to me. It sounds like, you know, even fighters in dire situations, you know, so if you're even in a more dire situation, let's say that you've been kind of getting by doing odd jobs, mowing lawns for your neighbors because you have no money and you're a former UFC fighter, but you had no preparation for this. You know, how long does $250,000 pay your rent, the gas for your car, et cetera, et cetera? A few years, you know, maybe 10 years, but that, if you 335 means you're probably going to take home, say, 200. How much does it take to live in America now? Can you really live on $20,000 a year so that 200,000 that you get lasts you 10 years? It's probably a lot less. I mean, it's probably closer to 40. So you got about 4 or 5 years worth of money at the lowest end of life just to get by. So it seems to me low. You know, I know many of the fighters are probably around my age. 50 something, which means a lot of them probably have kids going to college. The money that they're going to get probably doesn't pay at a high end, more high end school, doesn't pay a full tuition. So if you're one of those fighters with 2 or 3 kids, certainly doesn't pay tuition for 2 or 3 kids coming up, 2 years apart or back to back or whatever. And not everybody needs to go to college or anything like that, but these are examples of what makes the money seem small. Comparatively speaking, there are videos out there and you can find them. And Dana White is well known as a gambler, as a guy who likes to play blackjack. And it's pretty, a number he's thrown out in some of these videos is $75,000 a hand at blackjack. So every fighter is getting precisely 4 hands of Dana's blackjack money. You can play 4 hands of blackjack if people don't know. Most people will probably know, but you could probably play 4 hands of blackjack in under 5 minutes. So the money starts to look less and less. $335,000 if you do a search for Dana, not Endeavor, just Dana's net worth. The last podcast we did, I made the argument that Dana's the biggest star in UFC history. And this is more proof of it, right? Dana's net worth, and those net worth sites, you can take them or leave them. I don't think they're 100% accurate or even, that close to accurate in some cases. And Dana doesn't have a salary that we know of and stuff like that. So they're cobbling together what they know. But in 2019, his net worth was rated at about $500 million. So Dana could pay this settlement out of his own money and still have enough money, $150, $165 million left, still have enough money to play poker at $75,000 a hand. So, yeah, I think that right now the UFC is ecstatic because the number's not that high. I think they depending on the I'm going to speculate as to some of the names in the lawsuit. If I throw out names, I don't want to drag anybody's name in there, and talk about things I don't know. But there are fighters that if they're part of the lawsuit, I could see why they need the money right now. A guy like Spencer Fisher, who has very publicly looked for help because he's going through conditions with, damage to his brain from the UFC. And a few $100,000 might help him, get stem cells or something like that, overseas treatment or something that's out of his reach now. So you can almost see why some of the fighters would want to take the money. But people that are living decently, that went off and started a gym that's successful or found some other type of employment where they're making, 70, 80,000 a year and they're living a middle-class lifestyle and they're facing, college tuition for their kids. This doesn't pay for that. If your kid's going to go to a community college, it probably does, or a more local school and stuff. But most colleges, tuitions are crazy. To the point where if you got kids in high school age, when I was a kid, the high school I went to had a $1,500 a month tuition. My understanding is that my high school tuition at the high school I go to now is in the $25,000 range. So if you wanted to send your kid to private school, you just chewed through most of that money. So I don't see how every single fighter could be ecstatic over this. Publicly already, we already saw Mark Hunt use the word rat. And, saying that between the UFC and the lawyers and stuff, they're going to chop up the money. I like Bob Mazey. I think Bob Mazey is a guy who sacrificed a lot here in this position. He's put 10 years of his career on the line to do this, put off a lot of time, faced a monster as an opponent and gotten it this far. But, Bob's going to make a lot more money than 300,000. He's going to make a lot more money than 300,000 a year for the last 10 years, probably. It's because the lawyers do take home a good chunk of that. And he's got, it's not all his money. He's got a legal team and he's got to pay. There was certainly investment to get it this far. But again, I'm just giving you with taxes, paying the lawyers, the amount of money that's going to be divided among the fighters is getting smaller and smaller.
No, settlement isn't taxable actually.
Okay,
so that's good.
Oh yeah, okay, that is good. But still, the lawyers, I believe, get 30%.
Mm-hmm.
So the 330 is now 220. It's when we were speculating that I imagined on the low end a higher number than this. Now, granted, I was just speculating, but I don't see how the UFC could be unhappy with this. Now, there's a 60-day period here where we're not going to hear much information. There'll probably be some kind of court order to keep quiet and stuff. And I imagine that part of the settlement, part of what's going to be figured out here is, it wouldn't be fair to take a guy who has 3 UFC fights and is in the lawsuit and a guy who's got 25 UFC fights and is in the lawsuit to give them each 200 grand. So at some point, they're going to have to go through all 1,000 litigants and decide how the money's getting chopped up and how much each guy gets. Very much similar to the first UFC contract with Reebok, where you heard it's like, okay, if you fought 1 through 3 times in the UFC, you get a $5,000 bonus for wearing the Reebok. And then if you fought, from 3 to 10, you get more money. And if you hold the belt, you get more money and it's topped off at a certain level. I imagine that the settlement's going to have to be chopped up that way. And I think that's a little bit of what this time period or grace period is going to be figuring out. Now, there's some rules around court and judgments and settlements and things like that, where the judge could step in and say, this settlement isn't fair or it's not legal or whatever. And, I don't hang a lot of hope on that. I think this is done. But at the end of the day, the judge could say, look, okay, you guys decide the money. If that's the money you want, you're happy with it, go ahead and chop it up. But I've seen enough evidence here that I suspect the UFC operates as a monopoly. And I feel that they need a chance to defend themselves, and that could still be proven. So we're going to continue with the case in some way, shape, or form so that this monopoly can be broken up. Because that's, at the end of the day, what the system is supposed to do. Is if a monopoly is proven, then it could be broken up. But I don't know how that goes, because I don't know why would the UFC part with any money, even if it's a small amount, if they have that potential risk to still have their business, because there's no business practices change from what we already understand.
From what we know, yes.
So if that is in any way, shape, or form in play, it's in the hands of the judge to decide. From the evidence I've seen so far, there's also a monopoly here, or the potential for a monopoly, and the UFC has to be given a chance to defend themselves. But we're going to continue with that portion of the case. And the moment that happens, I think if I were the UFC, I'd pull my settlement and say, no, we're going to need that money to defend ourselves, which they don't. They have money, But, and that's just speculation on my part.
Right.
If not, then the only thing that is going to happen here is that we got 60 days and, the lawyers did their job. Most people, as an insider, I suspected that the UFC was going to have to do something, part with some money at the very least, because I believe they're guilty of a monopoly, and I believe they're guilty of underpaying the fighters. And general bad behavior on the business end. And, I have some firsthand experience, and obviously, as a person observing the sport, I've seen this behavior for going on 2 decades. So I didn't, but a lot of the public, a lot of people from the very beginning said, you guys are nuts to sue them. You're never going to get anything. Well, now they did. They got, more than $250 million. So those people, sure, those are probably the same people that are knocking it right now that it's not enough money or this, that, or the other stuff, but their ability to complain is limited, and their ability to, back up their rage or their statements or anything like that is limited. But I'm trying to analyze the data that we have here, and I don't think it's a good day for the sport. Were you able to find any statement from Don Davis or anybody in the PFL? Because those companies now, PFL One and things like that, they're now on the UFC side. Like it or not, the UFC can say, well, we've got competition. What do you mean we don't have competition? One just signed Ngannou. They took our heavyweight champion. And all of a sudden, that which we saw as a power play against one guy, and a part of the thing is that they didn't want to pay, becomes a situation where it worked in the UFC's favor. And there'll be, and one is an external company. We've got international competition. We do international shows. We're big in Asia. We have an Asian company that's big over there. We don't even, we haven't never really taken any fighters from them. They executed at one point the mysterious trade for Demetrius and this, the other stuff, allowing Demetrius Johnson to go over there. Now that works in their favor. We've lost our heavyweight champion and our flyweight champion to competitive companies that are out there. How can you say we don't have competition? So it's going to be very, and again, we're just speculating that the judge might say there's the financial settlement, but I suspect there might be a monopoly here. The UFC must be able to defend themselves. And what would the UFC's defense be? Well, there you have two central points. At the end of the day, the one guy who's the heavyweight champion and an international guy.
But I don't think ONE FC's issue would even play here, because they're just looking at the United States in this case, right? They're not taking stuff in other countries into consideration.
No. In terms of what the judge can look at and decide and things, you're right. Where it's America's judicial system. But if I were the UFC, I would bring up ONE. I would say, look, sure, we're an international company and we are facing competition. You're trying to sit here and tell me that we're not facing competition. We face competition. The fact is, it's bigger than Hook and Shoot's competition in Indiana. They don't have to worry about ONE, taking their fighters, because their fighters aren't that level. But we do, even though we don't even operate in Singapore or whatever. We have a company based out of Singapore that we have the potential for them to steal our fighters. Point in case, a guy that many people consider the most skilled fighter of all time was stolen from us.
No, they traded him, so it wasn't necessarily stolen. They traded him to Ben Askren.
Is that how it was?
Yeah.
Is that what it was? So Ben,
yeah, so Ben went over. They gave him up because they felt he didn't, Demetrius Johnson's a small guy. They didn't need him. He didn't sell,
right.
So
I think that's some of that could be forgotten. And I think that, again, they may say, however you want to couch that ONE is more concentrated because they're Asian in the lower weight classes. So they had to give up their weight class, and they can't even concentrate on them because all the best fighters are over there. Who knows how they could belittle themselves in order to defend and keep what it is they have. You're right. That trade did happen that way. And they didn't just steal Demetrius. But the fact is Demetrius is no longer under the UFC flag. He was over there. And I think that they're going, if they're forced to defend themselves against a monopoly, then you're going to see them defend themselves tooth and nail.
Right. Now, I want to ask you something because when we talked to Bob, he said, I think he said that, the change of business practice was a sticking point, that they wouldn't accept a settlement if there wasn't. So why? Now, we haven't heard that there's any. Do you think there's any chance we'll hear anything beyond what we've heard already?
No, I don't think so. I don't think that that's been decided yet. Like the UFC is going to change their business practices. Once again, the UFC can say, go look at any employer and go look at all the auto workers union, all the supermarket employees unions, all the workers for Walmart, all who are not unionized, if I understand things correctly, all the oil workers. Look at every employment across the country. When you tell me people who've gotten a 500% raise in the last 20 years, because the UFC started out giving you fighters 2-2, and the entry level now makes about 10-10. It's a 500% raise. So they're going to use sheer numbers like that. They can say, we pay and have changed our business practices, and we've lifted and given people way more money than in other businesses they do from year to year as our money has come in. And that's what's scary, because I'll tell you, when I was in Bodog, there was a Canadian fighter. And he was well backed. They had sponsors, they had a couple lawyers, they had a good team. And their leader came to me, sat in my office, and said, we've done the math. They made a presentation. Nutritionists, gyms, coaches, and things like that. They figured back then that for every fighter, for there to be more or less a balanced world where they could spend that money at the same level. Because right now, once you pay John Jones's money, John Jones has the money to spend on top trainers, top everything. I wonder if Aspinall's at that level yet. He probably has people who will help him, and jump in there. But how much of that is counting on people's help, not being able to solidify and just cut the deal, have it in advance, or not be worried about it? In order for it to be a balanced situation, 15 years ago in 2007, 2008, they said the fighters should be making probably about 60 grand a fight. And that's 60 grand a fight, where after paying everybody, they may take home 20 grand. And you figure they're fighting 3 times a year. So that's 60 grand. Now you've got at least a middle class income and all those expenses for what you do taken care of. The best gyms in your area, the best nutritionists taking, the best nutritionist means you're not eating McDonald's. You're going to take care of your food, make sure, whatever is the style that you want to take. Supplements are a big deal. A lot of people say, steroids, this, that, the other thing. Every one of these fighters is on legal supplements. And supplements are not cheap.
No.
So if the number that these guys had calculated, maybe, it wasn't a perfect number, but if 2007, 2008 time period, they felt comfortable enough to approach me with a number of $60,000 per fight, and the UFC is still grossly underpaying most of the roster while making it top heavy with other guys. And the advantages at the top level, hey, they have disadvantages too, because now they're famous. They can't walk into a regular store. They're recognized. A lot of them like to lead the lifestyle. Like John Jones has been defeated by the lifestyle. John Jones is from upstate New York. I've been to John Jones's hometown. I would speculate, it would surprise me a great deal if John Jones wasn't the only owner of a Bentley in that town. And most of the problems he's had legally, and, crashing cars and hurting pregnant women and running out on stuff, is in Arizona, where he was able to pay for, or New Mexico.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah,
So I
Albuquerque.
apologize, but still with New Mexico, either he had the money to buy himself a home or rent an apartment or stay in a hotel. You know, a fighter making $10,000 entry level can't go train at Jackson's and say, yeah, you know, I'll be there 2 months. Just here, take care of the hotel. So there are some advantages and disadvantages with the top heavyweight they pay. And again, the most of the roster can't afford to go train an American top team or a Jackson's or any of the other elite super gyms. Not to mention also have a nutritionist, also buy the food, buy the supplements, take care of all that. Some of the guys, you know, your home, your wife, your kids, this, that, the other thing. It's like, okay, look, I'd love to be able to say, look, here's the bank account. You take care of the kids. I'm going over here. So I'll give you a good example. In Brazil, with the Royler Gracie. Now, the Gracies, they make decent money, you know? So Royler was able to, right before competitions, get himself an apartment and leave his family behind so that he wouldn't have them as a distraction. It was better for him to go and win and make the money so he can take care of his family. I mean, obviously you have a good partner who's taking care of things and they're not, all kinds of problems that you got to go back to and things. There are X factors with every individual. But just being able to leave your home for a training camp is a defining moment for a fighter. In the UFC, so what if you're a guy who can't afford that and you're facing a guy who can afford that? That's the number that 60 grand came from, is where you're trying to give everybody enough from the company where there's an even playing field. So if that can be proven but the UFC has the ability to say 500% raises in 20 years. You tell me any business that's done that. The Amazon workers. Amazon employees aren't making 500% more now than they were a couple of, 10 years ago. Yeah, Bezos has all the money, Facebook workers, it's not like Zuckerberg said, take everybody making $10 an hour and give them $50 an hour. Or he brought them up to 20 and then 30 and then 40 and then 50. Nobody at the entry level of those jobs and stuff is making that kind of money. It all goes to the executives and things. So the UFC has a lot of examples that they can show that they have already taken care of changing the business practices that they don't need to do anymore. And that's what makes it kind of worrisome, because it's just semantics, how it looks and things, even though we all know, again, what's the name of this? There's a Brazilian kid, probably 15 fights in the UFC recently, that said he's retiring. You go into the UFC and you have a 8-5 record.
I think he's from New Zealand.
Okay.
Pedro, yeah.
Okay. You have an 8-5 record. Every time you took that loss, those 5 times you took a loss, you got half the money you were probably in your head thinking you were going to get. And your next fight was for the same amount of money with no raise. Mm-hmm. So you've got guys with decent records that say, I can't do this anymore. But again, there were guys, back in the old days, I believe if we look at it, Bob Mazey's initiation into this was a fighter named Gerald Strieben. Gerald Strieben fought in the UFC on a pay-per-view. He fought Josh Thompson, a guy who was one of the top fighters in the world at the time. Probably a guy where there was a disparaging difference between the amount of pay. Gerald was making $2,000. He got knocked out and had to pay for his MRI. He probably took home about $300 for his UFC fight. Bob Mazey looked at that and said, this is wrong. He was trying to borrow money to get home to Oregon on a Greyhound. And he said, this is wrong. So now They make 10,000 and 10,000. Maybe there's some help with the medicals, this, that, the other thing. The UFC can make a big claim to change already. And that's what's dangerous, because it comes down to, how deep are they going to dig? How much evidence are they going to look at? Or they're just going to look at some numbers. And this is just speculation that this is even coming up. The UFC may have already avoided this type of scrutiny. But that's the one hope that the people might have, is that the judge would say, okay, these fighters and everything here is taken care of, but what about the business practices? I still fear this is a monopoly, so we are going to have to look into that. Then what happens? Bob Mazy said, I'm out, and these fighters all got their money, so they're out. So he would have to appoint an investigation of people who may or may not know anything about the sport to look at it and start from scratch, which means the UFC can extend that 5-8 more years.
Well, I mean, he's already got that stuff on point, though, you would think, because that was the backbone of the trial.
No, but the thing is, that's really only Bob Mazy and his law firms and his lawsuits word. The UFC must be given a chance to defend themselves. It's not like you could say, yeah, I still think it's a monopoly, so we're going to change business practices. That is not coming.
Right.
That's not what's coming here. The UFC will still want to defend that point. If he could, I think he could only say there's still a monopoly here, so we're going to keep that aspect of the case going and hire independent investigators and look into it from a monopoly standpoint. And again, since that would be a new beginning kind of thing, then you're looking at it. So you're not looking at any change in the near future. And I'm talking about in the next couple of years. If this lawsuit had gone through to court and the UFC appealed and lost, that could have forced change faster than a new beginning looking at them as a monopoly. And again, that's just speculation, but I feel inside, my opinion is that they act like a monopoly. And if a judge recognizes that monopolies are illegal in the States, the judge would have to want to pursue it. But again, with the UFC in this lawsuit, in their defenses, they've already said 5 times the raises, this, that, and the other stuff. They were denied the ability to present 5 or 10 fighters, a list of guys that was going to defend them. But all those guys would now be possibly there to defend them. And you don't have 10 times the numbers of guys that are going to come up and speak against it. So, yeah, this was a day the Black Hats won. That's just my opinion.
But, I mean, we don't know this because we're not legal people. But, I would assume in a judge's position, there could be some accountability if he looked the other way because the UFC just paid peanuts out in a settlement and he ignored the obvious, which is that something illegal is going on, and he just decided to sweep that on the rug because they gave a few bucks out to these 1,000 fighters or whatever.
Yeah, again,
I would think there's some accountability with judges in that. I don't know that.
I'm not sure exactly. Somebody could say, another judge could say, I don't know how an independent investigation could be started towards a monopoly, but somebody could say on the legal end, on the front end, maybe this has not been addressed, so we're going to keep looking into it. Even if this judge didn't do that, it would probably be harder to do. But like I said, I think that because then this judge would say, hey, look, this is why I have to defend himself, right? It's like, this is why I decided not to look into that further or whatever. 5 times the raises. We'll use that as a superficial point, but, so like I said, and anything that gets decided that way, is you've now gone back to the beginning. So they delayed it 10 years. So look at them, the UFC being able to keep this going for at least 5, if not more years. So this will not change the landscape of the sport. Most of the guys that are at the top of the game Now, if that were to happen and it were to not go in the UFC's favor, most of the guys at the top of the game now will not be at the top anymore once this is settled.
Yeah.
So the Black Hats won, in my opinion.
Right. Oh, I agree with you. In fact, I think maybe it makes the UFC's position even stronger than it was.
Yeah. I mean,
Makes them even more of a monopoly than they already are.
Because me and you have tossed around numbers on this for a very long time. And we also have an idea of what it takes for, like I said, that $60,000 number that they gave me, those Canadian fighters and that team gave me 15 years ago for the cost of a fight and what it would take a fighter to live a decent lifestyle. He's not out, if they're getting 60 grand to fight 3 times a year, it's 180 grand. 180 grand a year is a good salary. It's an upper middle class salary. But it's not like I'm going to work 3 years and retire money. So they were not that far from reasonable if they weren't being reasonable. They were not that far from reasonable. They weren't asking for exorbitant amounts of money. Like every fighter should make $1 million or anything like that. But if that's the case, and they want to look at it that way, where the fighters are still not making enough, and you still have fighters literally doing charity work to fight in the UFC, hoping that they break big and win so that they get raises and may become more. Yeah, all that's unfair. And the fact that they can't even tender an offer from any other company, even the slim competition that's out there,
But it is a big reversal, from what Bob told us. He told us, if there's not a change of business practices, we won't accept.
If I remember, and we could look at it, you could maybe clip it. But if we look back at the interview, I think he said philosophically in some way that they're with that they want the business practice changed. But I don't think he committed to it in his wording. I don't think he committed to it as being a showstopper. And obviously it wasn't a showstopper, because if this settlement was offered without the business practice changes, then it should have been rejected. And they should have been winding up for court. So the fact that it was accepted and there are no business practice changes that we can see, and get business practice changes, the judge, in speculation, and if this really didn't go the UFC's way, I was saying this could mean nullification of every contract they have right now. There are probably lesser degrees that they could be affected by it. But we haven't heard any of that. Maybe in 60 days, when every fighter's gotten the amount of their payout and all the legal mumbo jumbo is done, we'll get an inkling of something where the UFC's agreed to continue the 100% raises, or, at this point, they could say, we took them from 2 to 4 to 6 to 8 to 10, and now we're at 500. But they can keep giving raises every year for the next 10 years. Agree to that. And people are getting 20% raises.
Because I would think okay, we won't take it. It sounded like a showstopper to me. I could see them look the other way if they got like 5 billion or $1 billion or whatever. But to get 335, which seems low.
That's your judgment, though. My judgment. That's what we think. The number,
I guess, everybody.
was high. No, I don't think so, because I think the guy who needs, 30,000 next week for a stem cell treatment, and you're going to give him 200, he's got it, and he's good to go.
No, I'm just saying everybody who's talked about this case who thought, okay, if the UFC does lose, this would probably be the amount. Yeah, from here to here. It's lower than that significantly.
I think it's low. You think it's low. But again, how did the UFC had to sit down and say, what is the number that we're going to give them? And somebody had to figure out this is the right number. And obviously they were right, because it was accepted.
Yeah.
Right? So how did they figure that out? It's like, look, here are what the raises were. This is what we can justify. Again, 7-Eleven isn't saying, we're going to they're not going to lose if, they're not in court or anything like that. But let's say a company like that were to say, we're going to give our employees, none of their employees are making 10 or 20% raises year in, year out. Not the guys in the store working, stocking the shelves and doing that, the actual workers, the people you see. Like maybe the executives are, the shareholders are making money. And that's what's important to the UFC. Again, every fighter has just accepted less than 5 minutes of poker in Dana White's world.
Yeah, peanuts.
How can Dana not be happy?
Yeah, peanuts. Really?
75 grand in peanuts. He hasn't played.
No, I mean peanuts in the big scheme of things.
Absolutely. You're absolutely
less than
right,
they deserved.
But that's why Dana's laughing.
Yeah, less than they deserved. I think we'd all agree on that. Less than they deserved.
Yeah. This was I wonder how much of this was just fatigue. How many, I wonder, here are the questions is, how was this decided? The judge couldn't have said, you got to take this settlement. Bob Mazy, I think, said, it'd be surprising to me if the acceptance of this was purely on the lawyers. But they got to go back to Mark Hunt now and tell him, this is the money you're getting. That's it. We decided. Now, was it a vote for the fighters? Were the principals in the lawsuit, Kung Lee, John Fitch, Kyle Kingston, you hear 6 or 7 names at the forefront of the 2 lawsuits. Do they have executive power to decide for everybody? How was it decided that they would accept this offer? That's one of the key questions that I would like an answer to. Yeah. Because I think it's important. Whatever it is, it is. That's how it was decided. But I think that should be public. Because obviously, Mark Hunt wasn't happy. And I don't think every single fighter in the lawsuit is going to be happy. But a couple $100,000 was enough to make most of them happy, I guess.
There could be some fighters out there that weren't a part of the lawsuit that have also stopped fighting and see it. They might see an opening and say, well, if they got this money, maybe if I can get some lawyers together, we could do something.
It could be. Could be. The problem is remember, like guys like Tank Scott Ferozzo, Hoist Gracie, Hoist is grossly underpaid.
Right.
Even though he made 50 grand for his tournaments.
And he might have the money to hire somebody because he makes a lot of money on his gyms and whatnot.
Hopefully that might be the case, but he might hire for himself. Why would he bother?
Right. That's what I'm saying, for himself.
Yeah. The UFC isn't worried about that.
Right. Payout.
It's not enough to worry a corporation that size.
But they did put in their new contracts, apparently.
And Hoist
you cannot be part of a class action lawsuit. That is part of their new.
And Hoist has no right after 7 years. So that's originally why I meant to say this is he might have the money now, but since he's been gone for more than 7 years, there is a statute of limitation on this that Mazy talked about. So a lot, and he said how painful it was to tell fighters that they're beyond that time frame and are no longer part of the lawsuit because he had to do that. So all those old timer guys, they get to look at a couple 100,000. Hoist Gracie has to say, I had to beat up. He won a 3-man. He beat 3 men in one night. Then the second night he beat 4 men in one night. And then the third time he beat Chemo and then retired. So now he's up to 8. And then the next time was 3 more. So he had to beat 11 fighters to make 150 grand for the tournament. And these guys just got a settlement for more than that. So yeah, Hoyt is going to be like, yeah, I was underpaid, but there's nothing he can do. He has no legal recourse. So only the guys more recently would have legal recourse. And, that might be a case-by-case basis. It depends. If you sue the UFC, they'll fight you in court. Are you really going to spend on $500 an hour lawyers? How many guys are capable of doing that in that pool? And could the UFC say, look, 300, we got away with it. Let's take another 300 and go and just give out a little bit of money, behind the scenes under the table like they did with the UFC bonuses.
Yeah.
Give guys bonuses for not suing them. So yeah, like I said, the Black Hats won.
Yeah.
I'm sad.
Yeah. Well, it'll be interesting. Maybe we'll hear more. Maybe we haven't heard everything.
Yeah, there's more will come out. Today was the first day of the announcement, and Bob Mazey and some of these fighters are going to have to answer some questions in public at some point, and those answers will be very telling and very interesting, one way or another. There may be something that we're not taking into account, me and you, that surprises us. But again, once it could be that the court decides that the monopoly thing is still an issue and has to be looked at separately. Other than that, I can't, I'd like to be surprised by something magical out there that I can't speculate because I don't know. But unless it's that, I venture to say there's not much more that can be done,
Right.
So we'll see. We'll see. It's interesting, but like we never got to April 15th, Todd. We never got to April 15th. It's now back to tax day. For me, it was UFC and court day. Now it's back to everybody pay your taxes only.
Right. Well, I mean, as always, it's interesting to talk to you about this stuff, and we've been covering it pretty heavily, and I'm sure we'll have more on it. From
yeah, for sure. I hope Bob comes back on. I hope Bob doesn't feel, the negative press, because I think he's maybe facing a little bit of negative press.
Yeah.
I don't want to be negative with him. I'd
Right.
love to be a forum for him to come and give his piece. And even if it's a situation where it's like, look, I've been doing this for 10 years, and the fighters decided that they want their money, and I'm okay with it. How much time are you going to work on something for free as well? So I understand it. Now Bob's probably going to make more than the UFC guys in a settlement, but the UFC guys were going about their day on a day-to-day basis, and Bob was working on this every single day. So, hey, you almost can't begrudge him the salary there, but the Black Hats won.
Well, as always, I like to give you a chance to talk about the dog rescue and how people can contribute.
Yeah, we've got the GoFundMe page. I've got my PayPal set up. You can Miguel1970 at gmail.com. On PayPal, you can send a little bit of money, or you can send a lot of money, and it'll all go towards dogs and strays in the rescue that we do here in Costa Rica. Nothing new to report since yesterday we taped, or a couple of days ago we taped on it. Dogs, I bought 80 pounds worth of bones, or 80 kilos worth of bones that the dogs are kind of still enjoying. Actually, Mingo was one of the longtime residents of the shelter, a cute little Labrador. It's probably about 6 years old. Went through a CAT scan today and has some herniated discs in his back. So that's going to be an operation. So a lot of dogs just get put to sleep when that happens. And, you got to think about that a little bit. This dog is, you see him and he's now, kind of crumpled and walking on two legs and kind of suffering. But, he's not lying down to die. He wants to live his life. You bring the food in and the bones and stuff, and he perks up, and he deserves a chance. So, some of the money, any money that we receive in the immediate future might go towards Mingo's operation. You can check out Ashley and the Wet Nose Project on Facebook, and she's got a bunch of pictures of Mingo and things there. She has been going through that for a couple of days where, Mingo collapsed, just out and out collapsed one day, walking out, during his walk. And he's been in this ever since. she collected enough money to get the CAT scan done and things like that. And this is the work of every day at the, if it's business as usual, you still got to walk the dogs, clean the dogs, feed the dogs, the whole thing. And then, inevitably, like people, eventually they get tired and they start to, get sick and things like that. And that has to be dealt with as well. So you always have X factors. And God bless everybody, even just for thinking about them for a little bit. So thank you.
Yeah. And as always, people, please subscribe and, keep supporting the episodes. We appreciate it. And until next time, take care.
Live to Fight is the type of company that Dana killed. It's a homegrown, it's a guy that just does good work and, puts it out there. And if you can support him, you really should, because he's precisely a guy who can't, his banners may not be able to hang on to UFC because he hasn't been able to pay them $100,000 to get his stuff out there. That's the corporate stuff that we're talking about now with the UFC, that, they've made everything at that level where it's all about money for them. And Live to Fight is a dude that does good work, makes you a great banner, and, doesn't have $100,000 to get on the UFC and stuff, and deserves support. So any fighter out there, anybody out there, owner of a gym or anything like that listens to us, God bless you and thank you very much for your support. And extend that to Live to Fight, because he's one of us. Those guys are one of us.
Hi, I'm Diamond, and you're watching The Todd Atkins Show. Todd has been covering the sport of mixed martial arts around the world since the 1990s. He has close ties to the fight scene in Hawaii and Japan. Please subscribe to the channel and watch out for future episodes. See you when you get there.